It's Sciandra's Saturday Night Special.
Hi there, and welcome to my Saturday Night Special. Tonight will be a little different, as I'll be foregoing a guest conversation. Instead, I'll be sharing a few thoughts on my art, what inspires me, and my general process. I hope you enjoy it. If you do, please like this video and subscribe to the channel to get updates on new content. Thanks! So the majority of my art centers around animals, and specifically anthropomorphic animals at that, and there's probably a few reasons for that. Animals are fun to draw. They're novel. They come in all shapes and sizes and colors. Their features are all different, their teeth, their noses, their ears, their fur, their mobility. Some are bipedal, some are some are non-pedal, snakes and such. They're interesting to draw. You can just elect to draw whatever you want for a suitable scene. So for instance, if I have a character that I want to portray, I can always elect to make that like a flamingo as opposed to a goat or a turtle or something like that, because there's just so many. There's like countless animals to choose from, and even among those animals there's all sorts of variety in how they look. Like the sexual dimorphism in certain animals is there. Like cardinals, the coloration is completely different for males and females, and it's something neat that you can do in lieu of drawing people. I think another reason why I specifically enjoy drawing these animals is most people enjoy them. Children have an affinity for animals. Old people have an affinity for animals. Children sleep with like teddy bears, and their nurseries usually have got any number of animals. Old people keep cats, lap dogs, that sort of thing. We gravitate towards them. They show us a relationship, or they're an avatar of who we are, maybe. And it's kind of a nice, easy, I don't know what the word is. It's an inroad, maybe, that people can say, I like cats, so then maybe we'll read Garfield. If Garfield was a person, I doubt as many people would enjoy reading it. From an artistic standpoint, I think that drawing an animal is a lot more forgiving than conveying a human, in at least an illustration, because there's a sense of self that a human being possesses that somebody else doesn't, that there's a sense of self that a human being possesses that allows them to understand what another human being looks like, and they know this on an unconscious and a conscious level. But with an animal, there is a little bit more of a forgiveness. And what I mean is, I typically draw koala bears, and I see any number of artists draw them with like tails, and for anybody who knows koala bears, they do not have tails, but there's this approximation that people might have in their head about what an animal is. And again, with koala bears. They have almost like a double thumb on their hands, and I personally don't draw it as such because that seems artistically wrong because they're anthropomorphized. But it's more forgiving if you, people point out very often that human beings have 5 fingers, and rightly so. And so the Simpsons, they all have 4 fingers, and this is seen as sort of a violation of norms, and it doesn't take people out of it. But I think that the Simpsons also being yellow allows for a certain level of disbelief or disconnection. If somebody like Hank Hill or the King of the Hill cast were drawn with 4 fingers because their pigmentation of their skin and their proportions of their head and all these other things are closer to real human beings, it would be they're less cartoonish, and I think animals allow for things to be more cartoonish. Aesthetically speaking, I reach for animals to draw that I find visually interesting, probably first and foremost. I don't knowingly ascribe too many qualities to them in a way others might be tempted to. So for instance, a pig doesn't need to be messy or dirty or particularly ravenous, although the pig I draw, Winston, seems to be very motivated by food. So for instance, a flamingo might be dainty or foppish, and I think we understand that because there is there is a certain level of pomp that is attached to that animal just by being pink and elegant and thin. And I might not go that way, so a snake need not be evil or underhanded, or that's something that's associated with time immemorial, with the Bible and the serpent in the Garden of Eden. But I personally have drawn snakes. I think I have a drawing of a snake that is hugging a teddy bear, and it's very I think it's very sweet. It's saccharine. So I enjoy playing with those things. I think that on some level they the stand-in of an animal needs to make sense. So I'm usually going with animals that are of a certain size, which I would call medium size, that doesn't violate maybe somebody's internal locus of how these animals should be interacting. And what I mean by that is I think that if you have a dog and a cat that are talking to one another, let's say in a scene, it's not a clear violation. It doesn't raise any hackles because I can roughly assume that they might be the same size, even though by and large, most dogs are larger than most cats. But in the same instance, you can have a chicken that is also in that conversation. And so it by the transitive property, the chicken and the dog can be the same size. And of course, that's not the case either. And I think we see this in things like Looney Tunes, where you have Foghorn Leghorn, who is one of the bigger animals, or characters, just in general, in that pantheon of characters, and it doesn't really raise any hackles. Like, a chicken is a small animal comparatively, and same with a rabbit. Like, a dog and a rabbit shouldn't be on the same stature, and so I would call these almost like medium-sized animals, even though there's a disparity. So my personal characters, Snugs and Winston, a koala and a pig respectively, are of the same stature, and that's not true. That's not the way it is. Like, anybody who's been around a pig, well, most pigs know that they're large animals. I think that the Spanish have got a word for the sort of pig Winston is. Cerdito means like little piggy or cute pig, and that's probably closer to what Winston is, because a pig and a koala bear are not comparable in size. Even smaller pigs, it doesn't work that way, but somehow you just kind of accept it unconsciously. And their landlady being a chicken, it still carries on that transitive property of these animals are all the same size, or they're ostensibly human beings. But to my point, aesthetically speaking, I would try and trend away from very large animals, because let's say an elephant or a hippopotamus, because that creates problems in world building. And so, for instance, if these animals all live in a town or a city or wherever, and they have to go to the bank, certain unconscious things are brought up, like why are the doors this size, and why are the windows this size, and why are the ceilings this size, assuming if an elephant is the bank teller, how the hell did he get inside the building? There's these sorts of things. So you have to come up with a schematic on how you're going to tackle these things. And for me, I use almost I think they did this with the Smurfs, like an apple sized rubric, and I believe like an apple is one apple, I want to say, or maybe it's 2 or 3, maybe it's 3 apples is the size of a Smurf, their height, right? And then Gargamel, the warlock that tries to capture them and eat them. I don't know if he's trying to eat them. I don't know what he's trying to do. He's trying to kill the Smurfs. He's something like 15 apples tall. I use that same sort of idea, except I use this with just circles or heads. So a mouse or a hamster or something like that in my art world is 1 head tall, and Winston and Snugs are 2 heads tall. And then there might be an animal that's 3 heads tall. I'm trying to think of something that might be there. And then they're like a very, very large animal might be 4 heads tall. So like a 3 head tall animal might be like a grizzly bear, and a 4 head tall animal might be an elephant. And of course these are all bipedal animals, and an elephant standing on its hind legs is horrifying enough. Can you imagine how tall it would be? So we're obviously not dealing with real scale, and I think that's just that's an aesthetic choice, but it's also it's a logistics choice too, because when somebody reads a comic or they look at a picture on an unconscious level, they have to agree that the world works. And if it doesn't, it can really sink their belief system in what you're trying to convey. And that's really, in my opinion, in my estimation, what art is you're crafting a belief system, or at least temporarily, for people from reality. So the sort of work that's always inspired me, and the stuff that I've always liked, at least with regard to animals, anthropomorphic animals, has been Richard Scarry and his Busy Town books. They're just wonderful. The idea of these animals and their little lives is always fascinating to me, and I've always enjoyed it. I still do. I have a fondness for looking at them, and especially his paintings and children's books from the 1950s are just some of the most lovely things in the world. I hope to have prints of them, high definition prints of them, to just put in my own children's rooms when the time comes, because they're that significant to me. A little bit more in terms of like cartoon stuff. I have a fondness for Carl Barks and Don Rosa's Scrooge McDuck comics, because there is a world that exists, and there's a mythology or mythos that is attached, and I've always thought that was really wonderful. I know that Don Rosa has talked about this, about Scrooge McDuck is a human being, and that's why things like in certain comic panels you'll see like seagulls or birds, and well, if he's a duck, how is he coexisting with a bird? And it's because he and Barks before him just clearly just substituted them in. They were just using them as placeholders to do it. There's no real function for them being ducks other than it was a Disney property that was capitalized on, and they were allowed to stretch their wings, no pun intended, artistically. Those comics are really, really good. I think that for me, the way I draw books, and at least within the universe Elijah Snuggs and Winston live in, is that all animals exist to a certain extent as humans. So for instance, a koala and a pig can be crime fighting partners, and that's not weird, but they're not having a chicken dinner. That kind of irritates me on a subconscious level, and I don't want to say that it breaks the universe for me to read like the Scrooge McDuck books, but it does. It's a niggling feeling that I didn't want to bring to my own books, so I have kind of strata in there, like high animals and low animals. So insects and fish are considered low animals, and then there's certain animals that I really don't even I don't think I've actually included because they're so near human. So like apes, monkeys, those sorts of things are so near human that I haven't even touched on them yet. I have ideas about like seals and walruses, penipids, I guess is what they're called, and that they would have almost like an antipodal sort of existence to the Turanian animals that make up my stories, because there's something very off, I would say, about drawing a walrus with legs or a seal with legs. It doesn't work for me in a way that giving a horse human hands. I would rather give them almost like mittens, There's an approximation of a hand, but it doesn't violate what's actually there. And these are my own prejudices, artistically speaking, that I employ, because if it doesn't feel good to draw, then why are you doing it? So that's where I land on that. Some other things that I enjoy are Bill Mantlo and Mike Mignola's Rocket Raccoon series. I think that was originally from the early 80s, very early 80s, maybe like 84. And the the art in it was really interesting, and then the cross section of animals, with I think there was a tortoise and a rabbit, I think, is the main villain. There was an echidna, or is a mole of some sort, was almost like a religious zealot. There's a lot of interesting like mythos and mythology to what was going on. I know that it was all built on the back of the Beatles song Rocky Raccoon, but it was very interesting. There was an entire world that was associated with it, and I'll just say real quickly as an aside, watching the Guardians of the Galaxy movies and seeing Rocket Raccoon, I understand why they do that for an expedience of character, but it's so different from what's in the books. If you have an opportunity to read what is that Bill Mantlo and Mike Mignola original series of comics, you really should, because it's weird in the best way, in a way that I don't think Marvel Comics allows themselves to be right now. That's my that's kind of what I like. I guess even I don't know. There's probably more. Like, there's probably some more like far-reaching things. Like when I was a kid, I used to watch this show called Adventures of the Little Koala, and I'm sure that had a profound effect on me too. And this was a family of koalas, and there were penguins and rabbits and all sorts of animals, just living in kind of like a suburban town, and they were they were the people of that town. There's no humans, and it's just really neat. I love stuff like that, because on one level it's just aesthetically pleasing, but on another you have to think about, how does this town work? And I mean, this is a child's show, it's for babies, but I like to think a little bit deeper and about the cosmology of the world and what it looks like, and it's obviously the sort of stuff I should be writing, because it's the stuff that interests me. And that was this week's Saturday Night Special. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for updates on new content. You can find me on the web at salsciandra.com. Join me again next week for a new Saturday Night Special. Until then, take care of yourself.